The void was absolute. No light, no sound, no pulse. I stood at the threshold of 19, staring into a silence. That should have been my final destination. I had died. The transition was complete, yet the stillness did not last. A vibration began to tear through the nothingness, a sharp, rhythmic ache that pulled at my core. It was the sound of my parents' grief. It hit me like a physical weight, a tether made of raw human agony that refused to let me drift away. I felt their hands shaking, heard the jagged intake of their breath, and felt the salt of their tears burning against my memory. The void fractured. I was being dragged back, pulled through a tunnel of crushing pressure until the cold air of the room slammed into my lungs. My chest heaved, a violent, involuntary spasm that forced me back into the prison of my own skin. I opened my eyes to the dim light of the bedroom, the ceiling, the shadows, the smell of antiseptic. It was all there, waiting. I was 19 again, anchored to the earth by the weight of their suffering. The return was not a miracle. It was a classroom. For 20 years, I sat in the silence of that room, dissecting the distance between the man I was and the heights I could not reach. I studied the story of Abraham, a man who stood on a plane of awareness so high he could offer his own son to the fire without the interference of human feeling. I looked at my own hands, shaking with the memory of my parents' grief, and saw only the heavy, dragging weight of my own limitations. I was bound by every pulse, every tear, every flicker of fear. He was free. I spent 2 decades measuring that gap, tracing the lines where human emotion ends and divine detachment begins. I realized then that we have been looking in the wrong direction. We search for paradise as if it were a place on a map, a destination to reach after the heart stops. It is not. Paradise is a state of consciousness, a frequency of being. It is the moment the soul aligns with the Creator, shedding the static of earthly noise. I stopped looking at the sky and started looking inward. If paradise is the ascent into light, purgatory is the violent descent into the dark. It is not a place of judgment, but a process of degradation. When a soul sheds its spiritual essence, it loses the capacity to sustain its own form. It becomes heavy. It sinks. It falls through the layers of the earth until it reaches the shell, the boundary between the physical world and the molten core. Here, the soul does not cease to exist. Instead, it becomes fuel. It is trapped in the crushing pressure of the earth, feeling the literal heat of the lava, the fire of purgatory searing through every fiber of its being. The horror is not the pain itself, but the awareness. The soul remains conscious, fully awake, feeling its own degradation as it is consumed by the planet's core. It watches its own light flicker and vanish, feeding the fire that burns beneath our feet. We are the third column in a cosmic system, suspended between the cloud of negativity and the fire of positivity. Every choice we make acts as a weight. We are either climbing toward the light or sinking into the furnace. The path is narrow. To understand how we navigate this cosmic path, consider the decree of the king. He summoned his 3 sons to the throne room and presented a single, non-negotiable ultimatum. He would send them to a distant, uncharted island for 6 months. Upon their return, he would not measure their worth by the gold they carried or the status they claimed. He would measure them by the deeds they performed and the knowledge they harvested. The stakes were absolute. Only those who returned with substance would earn a place in his kingdom. The brothers departed the palace in silence, the weight of the decree pressing against their chests. When the ship finally scraped against the sand of the island, the crew left them there, alone. The brothers stood on the shore, the ocean stretching out behind them like a vast, indifferent mirror. Before them, the landscape shifted. The path forward split into 3 distinct, imposing structures. They were not merely gates of wood or stone. They were manifestations of desire. To the left, the gate of food. The center, wealth. The right, beauty. The brothers stepped forward, and the choices began. The eldest brother did not hesitate. He moved toward the gate of food, drawn by the scent of roasted meat and heavy fermented sugars that hung in the humid island air. He stepped inside and found a banquet that never diminished. At first, it was a feast of indulgence. He ate until his hunger was gone. Then, he ate because the food was there. And then, he ate because he could not stop. The sensation of fullness became a dull ache. Then, a sharp, persistent pressure. He ignored the signals of his own body, pushing past the point of satiation into a state of frantic mechanical consumption. His movements slowed as his frame grew heavy. The vibrant colors of the fruit and the richness of the wine blurred into a singular, nauseating cycle. He sat at the table, his hands shaking. As he reached for more, his breathing becoming shallow and labored. The air in the room grew stagnant, thick with the smell of decay. He reached for a final morsel, but his grip failed. His chest tightened. He slumped forward, his life extinguished, leaving behind nothing but the remnants of his own excess. The second brother turned toward the gate of wealth, his eyes fixed on the glitter of raw diamonds scattered across the floor like frozen light. He did not pause to look back. He fell to his knees, clawing at the stones, stuffing them into his pockets, until the fabric strained and tore. He filled his shirt, then his pants, then his boots. The weight was immense, dragging his shoulders down. Yet he kept reaching for more. He stripped away his layers to make room for the hoard, piling diamonds against his skin until he stood entirely exposed in the cold, damp air of the vault. He was shivering, his skin pale and marked by the sharp, jagged edges of the stones. But he refused to let a single gem fall. When the ship finally returned to the shore, he waddled toward the gangplank, his body bent under the crushing burden of his prize. The guards met him at the edge of the water. They did not speak. They moved with mechanical precision, grabbing his arms and forcing him to the sand. One by one, they tore the diamonds from his grasp. They left him there, trembling in the dirt, his body bruised and his pride utterly dismantled. He had nothing to show for it but the cold ache of his own profound failure. The youngest brother walked through the gate of beauty with nothing in his grasp. His hands were clean, his stride steady, and his eyes held the reflection of the island's hidden rhythms. He had spent his months tracing the source of the river's glow and decoding the complex patterns in the songs of the birds. He arrived at the shore as the ship returned, standing in the sunlight with a mind sharpened by the architecture of creation. The crowd gathered at the docks, their faces etched with the memory of the second brother's humiliation. They looked at the youngest, expecting the same frantic desperation, but found only stillness. He carried no stones, no remnants of a feast, and no weight of greed. As he stepped off the ship, the air around him seemed to clarify. The people turned away from the shivering, broken brother who had sought wealth. Instead, they moved toward the youngest, their hands reaching out to lift him. They carried him toward the palace, not because of what he held, but because of what he had become. He had brought back the only treasure that survives the grave. The story of the three brothers is not a fable from a distant land. It is the blueprint of your own life. You are currently standing on the same island, moving through the same gates, and facing the same choices every single day. Understand this clearly. The physical world you touch, see, and measure is merely 1% of your total existence. It is a thin, fragile shell designed to test the quality of your internal architecture. You are here for one purpose only: to upgrade your energy intelligence. Every moment spent chasing material gain is a moment stolen from your own evolution. The body is a vessel, a temporary instrument that will eventually fail. When the vessel breaks, the only thing that remains is the frequency of your consciousness. If you spend your time amassing fortunes that vanish at the tomb, you are building a house on sand. You are ignoring the internal map that the youngest brother carried back from the Gate of Beauty. The transition is coming. Look at the energy you are building within. This is the only currency that survives the grave, and the only path that leads away from the descent. If you waste your time amassing fortunes that vanish at the tomb, you are not merely losing time, you are losing yourself. The universe does not tolerate stagnation. When the physical shell is discarded, the energy you have failed to upgrade does not simply vanish. It begins a long, cold descent. You risk falling into the lower forms of existence, trapped in the mindless cycle of animals, the rooted silence of plants, or the absolute, crushing stillness of minerals. This is the penalty for choosing the gate of wealth, or the gate of hunger over the architecture of creation. Beyond these states lies the point of no return. It is the center of the earth, a place where the soul is stripped of its essence and reduced to its rawest, most desperate state. Here, the soul becomes the very fuel that feeds the fire of purgatory. Imagine the sensation of that degradation, retaining the full, agonizing awareness of your own loss while your essence burns to sustain a cycle you can no longer influence. This is not a metaphor. It is the logical conclusion of a life spent chasing shadows. The heat of the lava is the literal fire of purgatory, and it waits for those who arrive empty of light. You are currently standing at the threshold of your own final choice. Upgrade your energy intelligence now, or prepare to become the fuel that feeds the fire.